So in this presentation, I'm going to explore concept of landscape citizenships and introduce another term, the public realm. I would like to juxtapose contrasting discourses on landscape from Beirut. One, market-led corporate, and the other, counter-corporate activist. I would like to suggest in this that the urban public realm is central to the discourse on landscape citizenships. And secondly, that a landscape framing has the potential to communicate to lay people the discourse on citizenship, empower and enable them to practice their responsibilities and claim their rights to the city. Okay. So I will start with a brief definition of the terms. The layered complexity of landscape as visible physicality, as multi-scalar cultural and natural processes over time, and as a culturally constructed worldview, encourages application of a landscape framing to abstract concepts such as human rights, democracy, and citizenship. And I've projected two projects that we were involved in, one with Shelley Eagles and Gloria Punchetti on human rights, landscape and human rights, and the second just come out, edited by Shelley, Carlston, and Denny on landscape and democracy. And landscape citizenships really follows in that tradition. I believe that this landscape framing contextualizes these concepts so they are effective and meaningful in a specific place and culture. Citizenship beyond rights and responsibilities. I think citizenship should be practiced. And I quote Giovanni Moro, 2012, who speaks about citizens, a term, active citizenship, to denote the ability of citizens to organize themselves, to mobilize resources and to act. And this is very much the essence of what I will be talking about. The practice of citizenship is different from one city to another. A landscape framing contextualizes, as I explained, rights and responsibilities, interpreting them so they respond to a specificity, spatial, cultural, political. As to the public realm, yes, of course, it's the spaces around, between, and within buildings, streets, squares, parks. The public realm is a key component of the landscape of cities, as we all know, and because of it is a space of social interaction, it is also the place where citizenship is practiced. Moving to Lebanon. As the Lebanese civil war came to an end in 1990, there was a shift in Lebanese state politics, and this was part of globalizing of the Arab Middle East, so it wasn't just Lebanon. But I think it took form in Lebanon, which always had laissez-faire economic policies. It has spread since. So this shift was towards neoliberalism, mainly excessive privatization by multinational corporate development, with the role of the state really reduced, much reduced as a provider of services. The first example for this kind of political and economic approach was in the reconstruction of the historic core of Beirut, the capital city, which was destroyed during the civil war extensively. Solidaire, a private shareholding real estate company, was created with the state legal endorsement. It was the brainchild of Prime Minister Rafik Hariri at the time, to manage the process of reconstruction. Solidaire expropriated Beirut Historic Center in its entirety, 118 hectares. So converting ownership into company shares. So it brings to mind what Danica was talking about, power and ownership. Yes, for sure, the power was now in different hands. And people that owned shops and small stalls that were part of their family inheritance for 100 years or more was then obliterated. Okay, wide protests followed, but they were ineffective. And in a typically neoliberal scenario, the state sided with Solidaire. Of course, it established it, at least at the time, justifying privatization as a sure way to animate the post-war economy in time of political instability and attract investment from oil-rich neighbors. Solidaire had a free hand in planning and implementation of Beirut's infrastructure. The problem here is that infrastructure is usually service provided by the municipality, and in Lebanon, it's an elected body. So they undermined the authority of the municipality, one, but also worse, had a free hand in realigning streets, overtaking plazas and public spaces, and changing the configuration, privatizing them in essence. And although Solidaire offered high-quality landscapes, and I quote from Angus Gavin, head of the planning team in Solidaire, landscapes that incorporates all aspects of the visible appearance of the public domain, and new infrastructure, including material finishes and paving, public lighting, and urban street furniture. In essence, landscape was reduced to beautification, packaging of the global city. Solidaire was the beginning in the 90s, but since this kind of approach and attitude has taken over the entire city. It has appropriated first the coast, the waterfront, the city's waterfront, which is in essence the largest urban realm, the only inclusive open space, and it has appropriated as well old and traditional neighborhoods, and these are two examples I will be discussing. So what happens is with the shrinking public realm, development and what has happened compromises the quality of urban living for the majority, undermines the rights of ordinary citizens, and creates two-tiered citizenship, the privileged and not privileged, those that belong and those that don't belong. It is implicit and, of course, inclusive and exclusive. This poster was part of the campaign, is very powerful because what it says is that because they want a sea view, we are deprived of our sky. And this is exactly what is happening as the waterfront has taller and taller exclusive towers, residential towers. They've changed the urban ecology, the climate, and of course the view to the sea, which was in itself part of the public realm, openness to the sea, to the Mediterranean. Failure of the state to uphold the right of citizens to provide basic infrastructural services, water and power, always there's a shortage, reached a climax the summer of 2015 with the breakdown of solid waste collection. The river is a river of garbage, packaged garbage. So this really was too much. People couldn't take anymore. And it was there were big protests against blatant state corruption and mismanagement. I will follow with a summary of very quickly, three landscapes, very different landscapes, and the activist campaign in each one of them. The first is the project of a highway, the Hekma Turk or Fuad Boutros Highway, which cut across old traditional neighborhoods. The project was planned in the 60s, revived in 2012. Later on, we found out because it's a way to replace walk-up buildings with high-rise commercial, and there was a lot of profit to be gained from that. So what happened is that a young architect, Antoine Atalla, came up, who was the first to start the campaign. And shortly, he's an AUB, American University of Beirut graduate, and shortly we joined him, each of us contributing what we can. Other NGOs did, and this is how it started. So this is the first press campaign that was given, and you can see from the logos a lot of people joined in. Now, the problem with the argument we made was that in 2012-13, this highway would not resolve the problems of the traffic problems. It would displace local communities, and a lot of them will have to leave the city. They cannot find another place to go to. You can see in this slide, the top slide is the kind of urban texture. There are some historic gardens and orchards that have disappeared from the rest of Beirut, and they're really 100 years old. And the buildings are also quite interesting. But the highway would take away all of those red buildings and, of course, much of the orchards and gardens. But being mainly architects and urban designers, the idea, there was always an alternative and a solution. So the alternative was to take this land, this corridor that was appropriated for the highway, and create a green corridor, a linear park that would preserve the gardens and orchards, the buildings, and connect communities rather than cutting them in half and displacing them. The second example, perhaps it's even older, is the Beirut pine forest, which is an iconic urban landscape that dates to the 16th century, which encircled Beirut, but with appropriation, it was reduced to 33 hectares. But it is, in essence, it was burnt during the Civil War. And in 1990, Île-de-France, the municipality of Paris, put in the funds and the expertise, and an urban park was planned, and all the burnt pines were replanted, so that it became an incredible urban park. However, it remains closed to this point. And the reason, as you can see, it says that you are not allowed to enter unless by the authority, a written authority from the governor. And the reason is really, the official reason is that the seedlings will suffer. But the real reason is that the surrounding communities are poor communities, displaced, Palestinian camp, and so they don't want these people using this space. It is an exclusive space. So even though it's a park, it's really not inclusive. A group, an NGO, Nahnu in red, Nahnu in Arabic means we the people of Beirut, has campaigned for a very long time to open up the park. They've staged protests, they've had posters, they've had discussions, and finally, in association with the governor, they managed to open it for a very short period. It was shut after that and continues to be shut. One of the interesting stories is that if you hold a foreign passport, preferably European or American, then you're allowed access if you're visiting. And which is ironic, because why would a tourist want to go to this park? I mean, it's the people of Beirut that need this park. So what Nahnu did, they staged a protest, and all the protesters, the activists, had blonde wigs on to say, look, we're not Lebanese, we're foreigners, please let us in. The third case is another iconic landscape, a unique natural site and landmark, a natural carved coastal cliffs, marine caves, natural marine terraces, vermeted terraces, very rare, and two breakaway rocks which Roushi comes from the Arabic corruption of Roche, the French word for this landmark. The significance is archaeological, geological, ecological, biodiversity, but also it is, Roushi is the only large, inclusive community space in Beirut. And you can see on the left celebrations of the Kurdish New Year, Nowruz, and it is used for swimming extensively. There are natural water lakes, and so people use them in the spring. So it's an incredible site, really, very, very beautiful. I was never an activist, but I vowed when I came to Lebanon in 2001 that if ever this site was threatened, I would go to the street and protest, and this is really what happened. The issue is much larger than Dalia, because the Dalia and much of Beirut's coastal lands were purchased by Prime Minister Hariri, in fact, all of Beirut's coastline, during the civil war, in breach of Lebanese law that classified these littorals as ecologically sensitive, non-buildable, state-owned land. The plan was to change the legal status or apply for exemption for high-end development. And this is what happened in the Movenpick, which is next door to the Dalia. So what happened is that we staged protests when the developer fenced, this is in 2013, when the developer fenced the site to commence development. This is when the protest started, and we formalized it as the Dalia campaign, which continues to fight, encouraged by its inclusion. I mean, I just found out that we have participants in the Dalia international competition we did for ideas to look at a vision for this site from Greenwich University, a team. And also we signed a petition to include Dalia as part of the World Monument Watch List, which was really very courageous of us, because we were nothing. We were not a formal body. We had no entity, but we got it, and it was an incredible boost for the fight. Okay, so we'll move on. I'd like to conclude. The emerging discourse from these 4 stories unfolds more than one landscape narrative and multiple citizenships. It is ironic that landscape is recognized and clearly present in the corporate discourse. The English word is used to articulate spatially and visually the public realm. However, prioritizing the visual, the corporate discourse reduces landscape to beautification. Worse, a generic landscape design conforming to set international models that dilute local and regional differences and transcend the specificity of culture and place. Downtown Beirut is not very different from Dubai or from Abdali in Amman or any other capital city. In such a landscape, citizens are reduced to consumers. People are constrained by set code of behavior, intimidated by manned security and extensive closed-circuit TV cameras. One of the residents, the Guardian, cites an interview with one of the fishermen from Dalia asking what they think of Zaytuna Bay. And he talks about the amazing fish in the lower landscape in the bay, but he says that security will never allow me to fish there. And when asked, what do you think of this as a public space? The fisherman says, Itani lifts his hands and smiles, those spaces are not made for you and me. So it's definitely very exclusive and proper. Now, in contrast, landscape does not appear in the discourse of the activist, partly because there is no proper word for landscape in Arabic beyond scenery, but landscape is very much present, powerfully, implicit, engaging, and empowering. Social, cultural, and nature-related values dominate the discourse of activists. The visual and spatial, though recognized, are secondary. Now, to end on a brighter note, nothing really comes out of those activist campaigns. Because in a sense, what happens is that we're active, we go, we shout, we carry banners, we organize competitions, but in the end, okay, we quiet down, we run out of steam, and that's when the developer comes in again. They come back with a vengeance, and they do what they want to do. So some of us are vigilant, but people have to make a living, and in an end, this sort of it peters out. However, a good thing that happened was that a lot of those activists, the same activists in all three campaigns, architects, landscape architects, planners, and other professions, but these were really leading, came together and realized it's not a matter of that landscape and this. It is much larger. It is about us, citizens of Beirut, and we can't just go with small, we really have to go to the global. They came together, pooled their resources, and established Beirut Medinati, which is a group saying Beirut is my city. And it was not very much a political campaign. At first, it was just out of frustration. But eventually, you can look at Beirut Medinati, the vision. The vision is very much all of the things that were raised in the campaigns. Inclusive spaces, the waterfront has to be accessible to everybody, and to celebrate the heritage of Beirut. But in 2016, Beirut Medinati, we were emboldened, and we ran for elections, in municipal elections. Everybody laughed because the political parties are very, very powerful, and all of those in Beirut Medinati running for this election, they didn't belong to any of the parties. That was the point. And in fact, they secured more than 1/3 of the votes. And it just goes to show that several things. First of all, that it's not enough to be an activist. Sometimes you have to play the game and go into politics or do something more radical, much as we hate it. But the other thing is that people are sick and tired. If they don't vocalize it, if they don't say it, if they don't express it, it doesn't mean that it is not there. So to conclude, whether the discourse of activists or the politics of Beirut Medinati landscape from those three sides mobilizes and empowers the public to explore the meanings and practice of citizenship. And to quote from Adams in Landscape Agency 2018, to force open a host of political debates. And this is the debate. I would like to conclude with a couple of questions that have puzzled me since I started writing the paper. First of all, I've talked about this, is activism enough? And if it's not, what is its role? Secondly, why design professionals? Why were design professionals leading all of these campaigns? And it's just very interesting to see. So I have some idea of answers, but I'd like to be a discussion. And what is the role of academics in landscape citizenships? What role can they play? There's the positive and there's also the negative. So I'll leave you with that. Thank you.